Hi, I'm Stephanie Gilmore, Curator of Collections here at the Colorado Railroad Museum. Today, as part of our Small Wonders video series, we're going to cover one of the 20th century's great industrial designers, Otto Kuhler. Born in one of the most exciting periods of world history, he experienced an idyllic Germany as a boy before the Great War, fought for the Germans during the war, and then ultimately moved to the United States, where he would live for the rest of his life, designing the most striking and streamlined locomotives of the steam era. The Colorado Railroad Museum's collection contains original Otto Kuhler paintings, etchings, drawings, photographs, and even some notes from Kuhler himself. Some of this was featured in the exhibit Otto Kuhler, Designing the Future, which was a partnership exhibition we did with the Foothills Art Center here in Golden in 2019. As we explore the collection, we also need to explore the man himself. The son of Otto August Kuhler Sr. and Helene Seiper, Otto August Kuhler was born on July 31st, 1894 in Remscheid, Germany. While he came from a long line of iron workers, his mother Helene was determined her son not become an iron worker like his father and grandfathers before him. The life of an iron worker today is dangerous, but was even more so at the turn of the 20th century. Fortunately for Helene, she instilled in him a love of trains and other machines from a very early age, which would steer him down the path of industrial design. As a boy, Otto was permitted to play at the mill near his father's forge, and that is where he fell in love with his first locomotive, known as Elias. Fascinated by the mechanics of steam engines, Otto would return home from the mill and draw the engines he had seen using his crayons his mother had given him. He claims in his autobiography, "Childishly crude as the drawings were, all the visible parts were in the right places." While we have none of his early childhood drawings, we are extremely fortunate to have a sketchbook of his that dates to 1908 when Otto was just 14. The intricacy of these drawings is stunning for a boy of that age. These skizzen, or sketches, are fictional depictions of locomotives from Otto's mind. The fact that they are entirely from his imagination is quite impressive, yet understandable since he grew up watching his father forge the various parts of steam locomotives. You'll see here that he also made sketches of tracks, bisections of rail, guns, and even this lovely little vignette of a European town. This measures only 2 inches high, and again, the detail is incredible. A few years later, in 1910 and 11, Otto produced this newspaper with a few of his friends. In 2013, this, along with the sketchbook, was given to the museum from Otto's family. As Otto grew, his parents thought he would make a good electrical engineer. However, this proved not to be the right path for him. All the while, he was sketching machines, primarily locomotives, but also locomobiles, which were an early type of steam-powered automobile. At only 18, he was hired by a locomobile company in Dusseldorf as an advertising manager due to his incredible artistic talent in drawing steam engines and car bodies. This job would send him throughout Germany, Holland, Belgium, and other European countries. Up until this point, Kuhler described his life as quite idyllic, but that would all change by 1914 with the start of the First World War. Much to his pacifist chagrin, Otto would go on to fight for Germany during World War I, and by a stroke of luck ended up a railroad soldier, through which he learned to run steam locomotives in addition to illustrating them. His first stint in the Army was quite short, as he was later discharged after a car accident dislocated one of his ribs. Upon examination by the military doctor, a heart flutter was also discovered, and Otto was summarily and honorably discharged from the German Army. Throughout Europe, he would ride and view many different machines, and he continued his work in the automobile industry after he was discharged in late 1914. His break from the war was brief. Soldiers were desperately needed, so he was called back into service by 1917. This time, Otto was again assigned to the railroaders. Luckily, this meant he would not see combat since he was busy running trains. He eventually ran a logging train to procure wood for lining trenches. It was also in 1917 in Belgium that Kuhler met his future wife, Simone, who was the daughter of a local doctor. They were engaged during the war and married later on April 29, 1920 in Remscheid. They would go on to have 2 children, Winona and Ronaldo. Post-war Germany did not have the same draw as it did before the war, so Otto and Simone decided to move to America for a fresh start in 1923. Otto moved first and chose Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania because he had a cousin there. Simone would join him within a few months. In the post-war years, Otto really poured his heart into creating etchings. He especially loved this particular medium for images of machinery because he could achieve great detail. Etchings are made using a metal plate, usually copper, that has a thin layer of wax applied to it. Using a stylus, the artist scratches away the wax to reveal the metal beneath. Once the image has been carved into the wax, the plate is put into an acid bath where the exposed metal is eaten away, creating a recessed design. The wax is removed before the plate is covered in ink, then wiped off, leaving the ink in the recesses. The plate is then sandwiched between 2 pieces of dampened heavy paper. This is then passed through a roll press, like the one you see here, creating an indelible image on the paper. The plate can be inked and pressed many times over to produce identical images. We are fortunate to have original prints from several of Kuhler's etchings. Most notably is a series of 5 etchings he created in 1926 while he visited the Baldwin Locomotive Works located in Eddystone, Pennsylvania. Here, he carved his copper plates as he sat in the shops and watched the workers manufacture locomotives. In addition to his railroad etchings, Kuhler also etched images of other industrial designs, such as bridges, sea ships, and airships. The Kuhlers only spent 5 years in Pittsburgh before moving to New York, 25 miles from Manhattan, where Otto had established a studio. There, he produced this image of the New York Stock Exchange in 1928, which he described as one of his finest plates. By the 1930s, Otto became a leading force in a movement to reinvigorate rail passenger travel by changing the look and feel of steam-powered trains. While the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was quite successful, Otto saw an opportunity to further improve it by redesigning its steam engines and logo. Streamlining the locomotives with a bullet nose would suggest speed, luxury, and comfort, while simplifying the logo would clearly define their identity and save on printing costs. Kuhler also changed the color scheme to blue and gray, reminding the passengers of the B&O's important role in Civil War transportation. Upon seeing his success with the B&O, Kuhler was invited to work for the Lehigh Valley Railroad. He modernized Lehigh's passenger trains with new color schemes, baggage racks, air conditioning, and fluorescent lighting. Here you can see his signature bullet-nose steam engine, the John Wilkes. In 1939, Kuhler was hired to oversee the redesign of the Hiawatha, a passenger train owned by the Milwaukee Road. Still streamlined, this steam engine had a totally unique look, making it one of the most iconic steam engines in American history. After the Second World War, and due to a marked decline in the use of steam engines, Otto and Simone decided to start a new chapter in 1948. At this time, they shifted gears and moved out to Pine Junction, Colorado. They bought a 460-acre cattle ranch and fully immersed themselves in the ranching lifestyle. While life was hard at times, they loved every minute of it. All the while, Otto continued to create art by now switching to mostly paintings. He embraced both oil and watercolor, as well as pen and ink drawings. By this time, his art was dominated by the narrow gauge railroads of Colorado, as they reminded him of his boyhood in Germany. He still enjoyed streamliners, though, and continued to depict them in paintings like the one you see here. This one appears to be unfinished, and may have been Otto's last painting. We happen to have a photo of him working on it in 1977. Otto and Simone moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1969, where they lived for 8 years before returning to Denver in 1976. At this time, Otto was still creating railroad artwork, but he also added landscapes and non-train subjects to his catalog. Otto passed away in Denver in August of 1977. While he is no longer here, his legacy lives on through his wonderful artworks. We are so grateful his family gave some of his collection to the Colorado Railroad Museum in 2013 so that we can share them with future generations. I hope you've enjoyed our journey through the fascinating works of Otto Kuhler. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time when we explore more of our railroad history collection at the Colorado Railroad Museum.
Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Commenting and sharing in particular may qualify as virtual engagements for important funding programs like the SCFD.